It is an honor to address this community as we enjoy this period of some respite from the pandemic and anticipate the coming of Pesach. What a joy to know that some of our teens are at Asrui for the first Nifty gathering in 2 years this weekend, and that many families and congregations will be joining together for in-person seders next week for the first time since 2019. Before we jump ahead to Pesach, let's take a minute to consider what is before us this week. This week's parasha concerns itself with a disease called sara'at and the steps prescribed to enable an affected individual, the mitzorah, to return from isolation after the disease subsides. The Torah portion also says that kanega, something like a plague, can afflict houses. Tonight, I want to use the metaphor of sara'at to reflect on the afflictions that have plagued Kenosha over the past 2 years. I think of what has happened here as communal sara'at. An activist I work with in the interfaith community in Kenosha sent her daughter off to UW-Madison this past August. Sadly, the student quickly learned that she was stepping into quicksand if she mentioned to peers that she is from Kenosha. The mere mention of which now brings a barrage of unwelcome questions, comments, and opinions. And did you know that in Israel, during those terrible days of unrest in the late summer of 2020, after the shooting of Jacob Blake, when our city exploded in arson, looting, and killings, that in Israel, every day on the television news, a map of the United States was shown with a big red circle around Kenosha. That's us, the city with the big red circle on the map. Unfortunately, our notoriety for all the wrong reasons did not end in 2020. The international spotlight came back in November of 2021 during the several week-long trial that ultimately exonerated a gun-toting teenager of killing 2 people and severely injuring a third back in 2020. Kyle Rittenhouse killed those people literally steps from our fenced-in temple backyard where we hold outside services in the summer. During the trial, ominous chatter on the dark web showed a photo of Beth Hillel Temple, noting how close it was to the site of the incident. And in a different post, someone surmised that the prosecutor must be a Jew. He is not. By the way, the only way we know this information is thanks to the amazing work of Ari Friedman of the Milwaukee Jewish Federation security team and his work with the nationwide SCN network. I want to just pause and give a shout out to him and to the Jewish Community Relations Council of the Federation for all the support they have given us and continue to give us during these difficult times. Luckily, calm prevailed after the trial, but we did leave our building for a few days once again out of an abundance of caution as we had in 2020. If all of that was not enough, since December, we have endured a spate of distributions of anti-Semitic literature in Kenosha neighborhoods, the most recent of which occurred a week ago today. This is part of a national hate group campaign that has targeted several states with the same material, including other places in Wisconsin. What is it like to live in a community that has been plagued by so many crises And how do we respond as Jews and as people of faith? This week's parasha, Mitzorah, has something to teach us here. Mitzorah deals with how healing is achieved after ritual defilement. And it teaches us clearly that positive measures are needed to overcome defilement. The parasha identifies 3 stages or steps in recovering from defilement. The first is to carry the defilement away. In the Torah portion, outside the camp, there's a ritual involving 2 birds. One is allowed to fly away, carrying the defilement with it. Early efforts to overcome our communal tzara'at and kenosha can be likened to this stage. People came in droves to clean up the damage and paint colorful messages of hope and humanity on the boarded up windows that blanketed the downtown. At Beth Hillel, we had Jewish texts about justice and peace, and we have now donated those pieces of art to Asrui in a gesture of letting them fly away, carrying the defilement with them. I want to pause here and just share my screen for a moment so that you can see these messages from Beth Hillel that had been on our building when our windows were boarded up and are now at Asrui. If you know the camp, there they are on the back of the Bitan, where the kids pass by every day on their way back and forth to activities, and where the Israeli dancing happens after lunch on Saturdays. But along with ridding the city of defilement came an attitude that was more like covering up than carrying away. Kenosha Strong became the catchphrase of the community, appearing on mugs and t-shirts and billboards and even on face masks. I don't know if you can see that. My face mask that says Kenosha Strong. In Mitzorah, the second phase of healing from tzara'at is shaving, washing, and bathing. To me, Kenosha Strong was like shaving the hair but not checking to see if the disease is still there under the surface, and then skipping the laundering and the bathing altogether. In some ways, our city leaders have been complicit in this failure. While there was talk about getting at the root of the problem that led to the unrest last summer, and 7 task forces were to be formed to deal with various aspects of it, the city's focus has instead been Kenosha Strong, building and reinventing Kenosha and its blighted neighborhoods. Now, while improving the city physically in those neighborhoods is not unrelated to the underlying issues that caused people to rise up in protest for weeks on end, the summer leading up to the Jacob Blake crisis, to date, only 1 task force has met and produced a report. While advocating for a more robust response from the city, Beth Hillel, along with the interfaith community through Cush, our faith-based community organizing affiliate similar to Micah in Milwaukee and Sophia in Waukesha, together we've begun to do the hard work of washing and bathing after those days of reckoning. We've taken a deep dive into exploring our own implicit biases and the role that white privilege plays in the inequities in our community. At Beth Hillel, we have done 2 several week-long book reads and discussion groups on the subject. We also grappled with and finally passed a resolution on Black Lives Matter that now appears on our website. the resolution commits us to more education and more activism. Regarding the anti-Semitic leaflets, the shaving, washing, and bathing phase of recovery came in the form of a solidarity walk and ritual of cleansing that happened last Shabbat. Now, many times, the Religious Leaders Caucus of Kush has provided a time of prayer and holiness in the midst of chaos over these last 2 years. But it felt like a big communal hug when about 50 people gathered at an event planned by the Religious Leaders Caucus to greet us when we came out of Shabbat morning services last week. After prayers and sharing from those who had received the leaflets, those assembled then accompanied us on a walk to the lakefront, where we poured lemon water onto the ground in a symbolic cleansing of the neighborhoods where flyers were distributed. In the Torah, the third ritual of cleansing from defilement was a sacrificial rite in the sanctuary and a so-called reparation offering. I want to focus here on the theme of reparation. In Hebrew, this offering is called asham, which is sometimes translated as guilt. In the final analysis, the only way we truly rid ourselves from the kinds of communal tzara'at we have experienced in Kenosha and the guilt that may come with it is through acts of reparation. Reparation is ultimately accomplished through the forming of alliances, demanding accountability, and educating ourselves and the rest of the public. For Kenosha, this is a work in progress. Our interfaith justice group, Kush, consortium of 17 congregations, has worked hard to form alliances with the already existing racial justice groups and the new grassroots groups that emerged since the summer of 2020. It has not always gone smoothly to build these alliances, but as a primarily white justice group, we realize that our work will be limited without partnering with people of color. Working with such partners, we continue to address police misconduct, including the incident last month when a 12-year-old girl was pinned down by her neck in a middle school cafeteria by a school police officer. Kush will be co-hosting a community conversation with the chief of police and with Kenosha's Coalition for Dismantling Racism next month in an effort toward reparation. On the anti-Semitism front, we partnered with all of the Racine, Kenosha area Jewish groups, the interfaith justice groups of both communities, and the local ELCA Carthage College last night to educate the community about Judaism and about anti-Semitism and how to respond. I cannot say enough about the help that Milwaukee's MCRC staff and Kai Gardner-Mishlov have given us all along in our various crises, and especially in making this event happen, not to mention Carthage for making the space and the live streaming available. At the event, a representative from the city presented a resolution that had been passed Monday night unanimously by the City Council in support of Kenosha's Jewish community. These actions, too, we hope, can bring about reparation. In the parashah, when offerings are made, the priest is told to elevate them as an elevation offering, v'henif otam tenufa. I share these stories about Kenosha this Shabbat not to raise them up as models for everyone else to follow, but I elevate them as offerings we have made in an attempt to bring positive measures that are needed to overcome defilement. It remains to be seen if these efforts will bear fruit and provide more positive reasons for Kenosha to be in the news. We continue our initiatives in the hope that people will soon begin to imagine a map with a heart around Kenosha instead of that alarming red circle. Ken Yehi Ratzon. May it be so.